taking last week off. We had a short staff, right? Because it was just you and Josh, right, Dan?
Yes, yeah. Josh and I held down the fort. I only turned off the stream once midstream, so that was good. And the audio issues were just on my end, so I had to press a bunch of buttons. But it seemed to be working out well. We had some good commentary, as we usually do on this show. We love to see it.
Perfect. If you want to reach out, give us a take and whatnot, here's how you can do that. We're on Twitch at Official Oilers Nation. We are live on our Twitter right now as well. We're also live on Facebook, which Nation Dan's going to be keeping an eye on, and we are live on our YouTube as well. Is the key to the Oilers winning games the four of us doing State of the Nation every Monday? Because we take 1 week off where it's not the whole group. And, I mean, the last 7 days have been a little bit of a shit show. Zach, your biggest concern, sort of, from the 2 losses with the Maple Leafs?
I mean, I think it's just simply the fact that the Oilers couldn't score a goal. You know, it's tough to see it happen, right? I mean, you're not going to win many games unless you score goals. So it's not for lack of trying either. I thought the Oilers actually played pretty solid 2 games against Toronto. Puck luck just wasn't there, and that's to be expected after the Oilers went on a heater like they had went on over like the last 7-game stretch heading into playing the Leafs. The Oilers had the 3rd best shooting percentage in the NHL. So there's going to be the market correction over time, but you know, when listening to the post-gamer last night, they sound like a very confident group right now, that this isn't going to be a series of games that really bring the team too low. It sounds like they're nice and level, and you know what? We'll see what happens on tomorrow night, I guess, and see what Oilers show up.
Josh Park, you have the fancy specs on, and if I know anything, I know that someone in glasses is a smart person. Josh, what do you think? What was the biggest concern from those 2 losses against Toronto?
Appreciate that, Ty. I'm far from smart, and the way that I look at this is it was disappointing considering the lead up to this 3-game series. Obviously, we have one more game coming tomorrow night on Wednesday, but I think, you know, there was so much talk around Matthews versus McDavid. Obviously, Matthews not drawing in the lineup, and then, you know, you're talking about, okay, this is the battle for the top of the North. You know, after a slow start to the season for the Oilers, they all of a sudden now are on a bit of a heater, and then now you're going into this series versus Toronto, and you're like, okay, essentially every single one of these games is a 4-point swing for the top seed in the North Division. Then all of a sudden now it's 2 straight losses where you're putting up 0 goals in both of those games, and it's like, okay, where does this team go from here going into tomorrow night's game? And then, of course, we've seen already in this morning's morning skate that, or I guess not morning skate, morning practice, that, you know, they're already starting to throw the lines in the blender, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. But I think it's just disappointing knowing what could come out of this 3-game series, and then now where we are 5 days later.
Yeah, 100%. Now, before I get to you, Nation Dan, I'm going to hop in and just say this might be unpopular, but this was a big set of 2 games for the Edmonton Oilers. You know, they had a chance to put themselves right in the mix for the top spot in the division, and it was back-to-back pointless efforts for McDavid and Draisaitl. I actually think the bottom 6 did an okay job of generating things. The goaltending wasn't good, but I'm not going to be afraid to throw some of the blame at the Oilers' big guns. When you're a star player, when you make the money, when you're, you know, wanting to win all the awards and that stuff, you need to show up for big games like this. And in my opinion, McDavid had a couple flashes in that second game, but for the most part, I think the Oilers' stars were just a little bit too non-existent in these 2 games. Nation Dan, you agreeing with me, or was there a bigger problem in those games?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with Calgary right now. Milan Lucic is the best player on the ice, and that's not a good sign for your team. When your third line is the one that's getting out there and stirring the drink, that's good, because it should mean that it opens the door for your top lines to do more. I think you kind of hit it on the head, Tyler, when you say that, because even before these games, since really the Calgary thrashing that we laid down, our top lines haven't been our top lines. The 4th line has been stirring the drink. The top line has been able to put some money in on put some pucks in on the power play to kind of gloss that over. But yeah, for me, I know a lot of people came out of that matchup screaming about goaltending again. But for me, the offense just wasn't there, and I don't think that it's going to consistently stay that way. I think that this is probably the wake-up call that those 2 lines needed. The coaching staff as well, seeing the shift in the lines there. But yeah, for me, it hasn't been so much the goaltending as you're not going to win those games 0-0. You have to score goals.
Yeah.
And the Toronto Maple Leafs are not world beaters by any means on the back end. And you should be at least getting 2 or 3 goals against that team every night. But we just didn't. We didn't see it. Didn't happen. Move on to the next game.
They're not world beaters, but that team played great team defense in that 2-game set. I have a feeling you might agree with me there, Zach.
Yeah, I do, but I think there's a little bit of a caveat too. Like Dave Tippett made mention of this last night. The Leafs scored 2 goals on their first 2 shots of the game last night, and they basically reverted to playing nothing but defense the rest of the night, right? Having a 2-goal lead so early in the game allowed the Leafs to be able to really just squeeze in their own zone and shut down the Oilers defensively, right? If it's 1 goal, maybe it's a different game, right? So, not getting 2 saves on the first 2 shots of the game, I think really hurt the Oilers last night because they're playing from behind the rest of the game.
If I can jump in, Ty, I want to touch a little bit on what you said about kind of just the lack of performance we saw from McDavid and Draisaitl last night. And I know I'm watching on Facebook here. A couple people are kind of starting to chime in and talk about, I know there's been a bit of a conversation around what's going on with Leon Draisaitl. He might be laboring some sort of injury right now, but I want to get your guys' opinion on, does it not seem like Leon is a little bit more reluctant this year to shoot the puck as much as he was last year? Because obviously in his Hart season, it seemed like every time the puck was on his stick when he was on that right side, he just seemed to fire it. It would be that half slap shot and he was shooting everything at the net from that side. And especially on the power play this year, I feel like a little bit over the last few games, he's starting to do it a little bit more often, but especially at the beginning of the season, of course, I don't want to harp too much on Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid because they're the 2 best players on this team, but it just seems like there's a little bit of reluctancy from Draisaitl to fire the puck right now. I don't know what it is.
I agree with you. I think at times Draisaitl's been opting to pass too much, and he's a guy who has 50 goals. Like, he should have the potential to just fire pucks and get to that number consistently. He's that good. So I am a little bit disappointed that we haven't seen Leon Draisaitl shoot more pucks. And maybe the fact that they're reuniting that second line, and we'll talk about that in a second, maybe that will help a little bit here. But yeah, I agree with you, Josh. I've noticed that. I don't think he's firing the puck as much as he used to.
Yeah, there's a slight dip in his shot rates per hour, most notably on the power play, actually. No, my bad. I'm looking at the wrong numbers. Don't listen to me.
But I know, Zach, you've brought it up in the past about not necessarily the shooting percentage for Draisaitl, but like the shot total. It seems to have taken a little bit of a dip this year, but I don't know. Maybe he's laboring something. I don't know.
Or it's coming in spurts. I feel like, there'll be a game where he wants to rattle off 4 or 5 and he'll do it. Then there'll be a game where it seems like, on a 2-on-1 or an odd man rush when I'm like, man, just rip the pill. And he's kind of just got his head up and he's looking around for a pass. He's trying to find Cahoon and all that. So maybe that's something that'll change. The Oilers, the second note here on State of the Nation is, does Tip need to make changes? And he decided to make some changes today at practice. We saw the big one, the Dry, Rye, and Kai line reunite Nugent Hopkins with Yamamoto and Draisaitl. Nation, Dan, is this the right move to put these 3 back together?
We're talking about the top line struggling. You understand that they have to make a change for both of them. It's tough because now it means McDavid is with Jesse, which is good, but then he's got James Neal on his left side now. So hopefully he can make something work with that combo. I don't think that it's out of the reach of the norm that could happen, but yeah, I understand making that move now. I know fans are pretty fired up that it happened finally. I think that there's stuff behind the scenes that we haven't necessarily heard about and probably will never hear about as to why we haven't seen this line go back until now, and that's fine. But yeah, they're back together, and hopefully it means good things against the Leafs and then going forward into the rest of the schedule as well.
Josh, what do you think? Happy that they're back together?
I'm very happy they're back together. I know there's been some conversation in the past about, McDavid wants to have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on his wing. That's kind of a caveat for him where it's like, yeah, I want to be playing with a guy. And obviously they're never going to come outwardly and say this, but you can assume that McDavid would want to have a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on his wing. And, this isn't 2017 anymore. This isn't McDavid with Ty Rattie and Milan Lucic on the top line, and you're looking at that and you're like, okay, I want to have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins playing with Connor McDavid. But going into this season, when we saw that reluctancy from Dave Tippett to go back to that dry Ryan Nuge line, I think it was because they wanted to have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the top line. They wanted to have someone that could shoot with McDavid. But now I feel like, especially now, it's time to make that change because of the resurgence that we've seen from Jesse Puljujärvi. There's been a lot of talk that, in the last 5 to 10-ish games here, arguably the second best player on the top line is Jesse Puljujärvi over that stretch of games. So, Is he the guy that's going to help drive that with McDavid now? Is he the guy that as soon as the pill's on his stick, he's going to be the one firing it at the net? Maybe. Would you rather have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on that line with the two of them? Maybe having James Neal on that top line, does it kind of slow it down a little bit? Sure. But I think that especially considering the last two performances, yeah, it was time. You have to go back to it. You can't just hold your foot on the ground anymore if you're Dave Tippett and be like, absolutely not going to that, because we've seen how many different scenarios this year already, how many different times that we've been like, okay, if you're going to go to that line, now's the time. And he didn't do it. So am I almost kind of shocked that they're going to it now? A little bit, but yeah, it was inevitable. They had to do it. It's been too long. So yeah, I'm fired up.
Zach,
yeah,
you happy they're back together? Is it time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen over the last couple of games, Dave Tippett has really brought out the line blender. Even early in the second period last night, we started to see him mixing it up a little bit with exchanging a couple guys in the top six, moving them around a little bit. So I think it's time. I think they deserve another look together. Look, they were the most productive line in the NHL for all of last season. When you look at the numbers, they were 28-8 at 5-on-5 in terms of their goals for and goals against. So it's hard to argue with the numbers when you see a line that's been as successful as they have.
We're about a third of the way done this week's episode of State of the Nation. Quickly, that line back together. They were so good last year. They sparked that big run from the Oilers in the new year. What is the best nickname for this trio? I go Dry Ryan Kai. Nation Dan, best nickname? You're muted.
Yamujion. It sounds like a Pokemon.
Yamujion. Josh, best nickname?
Go to Zach first. I got to think of one.
I mean, I like the dry line because it's nice and simple, but I also like the dynamite line. I think that one's pretty solid.
I think dynamite line could work. Honestly, the one thing I'm kind of jealous of when you look around at some of the other Western Canadian teams, like the Canucks have the Lotto line, and like that sounds so cool. And Calgary has the 3M line. Again, a nice catchy nickname. I think this trio needs to have like an agreed upon catchy nickname. It's okay, Josh. It's hard. It's hard.
I can't even think of one. What would I even?
I like dynamite line. I think that's pretty catchy.
I like the Lotto line. Who's the Lotto line?
Isn't it like Miller? Zach,
I think it's Miller, Pettersson, and Besser.
Okay, because
that's their second.
I'm not 100% sure on that.
I think that is the line that they were running with. Because the top line was Pearson, Horvat, and
Hoglander.
Whoever.
Anyways, if you have a good nickname for this line, drop it into one of the many chats where we are live right now. So that line reunited. Neal up with 97. I'm not a big fan of James Neal up there. You mentioned it, Josh. He slows down that line too much for me. And I think being out of the lineup for as long as he has been and the COVID issues has really hurt Neal's ability to keep up in the top six. Not that he was great at that before. I would love to see Tyler Ennis up there personally. I think Ennis can do for the McDavid line what Yamamoto did for that Draisaitl line, in the sense that hard on the forecheck, creating turnovers, makes short, simple plays with the puck. I think that could be a good trio. Am I the only one who would like to see Ennis up there with Neal, or would you be nervous about breaking up that third line?
I was just going to say, devil's advocate, do you want to break up that third line? I mean, I like Ennis up there a lot, right? I mean, we saw last year after the trade deadline that Tyler looked pretty good playing up in that alongside McDavid there. But given the way that Kyra, Ennis, and Archibald have sort of found their way together and been arguably one of the Oilers' most productive lines as of late, with switching up the top six, how much do you really want to blow the bottom six up to make that change as well, right?
Brad Stepanko agrees with me. He says, yes, Ennis would be good up there. Some call me Timmy, said the Lotto line is 6, 40, and 9. Pettersson's 40. Miller is 9. Besser is number 6. Josh, would you want Ennis on that top line, or do you not want to break up that bottom 6?
Well, it's tough because you don't want to take that line out, that third line. What was that saying you said last time? It was you don't want to steal from Peter to pay Paul. I think
that's an old low tide line. You don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul or something.
A low tide line, and I like that. But that line has been, although of course you're like, oh, they're not producing 5-on-5. What are they doing for you? But they're helping swing momentum, that third line, and as long as they stay even, that's essentially their goal on this team. So I do like Ennis's offensive skill. I think he's actually a very skilled player. I think he's underrated when it comes to his skill. We've seen flashes of it this year. He'll jump up in the rush and all of a sudden make a move. He scored a goal earlier this season where we were like, what the heck was that? Where did that come
against
from?
Ottawa, yeah.
But Yeah, would Tyler Ennis really be the answer on a top line with McDavid and Puljujarvi? I don't know. Would he be probably a little bit more dynamic up there than a guy like James Neal? Sure, but yeah, I don't know. I think at this point, I almost crave a long-term answer on that line, man. And I thought that maybe Puljujarvi, Nugent Hopkins, and McDavid would be it, but I've been saying this for the last few years that you just need a certified stud to play with McDavid. Is it going to be Puljujarvi coming here? Maybe, but I don't know. I crave just like a solid first line, and I don't know when we're going to get it, but yeah, I digress.
Dan, what do you think?
I think Ennis is the play there. I haven't even really considered it, but. And I don't think you make the change right now because you got to make sure that dry line is working before you make any more changes up top, because you're going to probably then slide Nuge back into that first spot. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be the end game here is Puljujarvi, McDavid, and Ennis. And McDavid and Ennis speed wise should be good.
Yeah.
The question mark there for me is the defensive side of the puck. It forces McDavid to go back and play deeper in the zone than usual, and so it's going to be something to watch to see if McDavid's happy and McDavid is clicking with whoever he's put up there with. That's the big key for me, and so yeah, I don't think you need to break up that third line just yet, especially because they've been the best line on the ice in these last two games. So hopefully you can put them out there on Wednesday night and they can continue to stir that drink, and then hopefully the top lines can come together for that reason alone.
Going to get into some trade deadline thoughts here coming up towards the end of this week's episode. Danger Suede in the Twitch chat said, why can't we he's talking about, they're talking about year 6 of 11 with McDavid. He says, we need to start adding and paying the price to get rid of questionable contracts. To me, the problem with questionable contracts is, like, what are you going to do? You're not going to find someone to, like, take James Neal off your hands right now, right? So that's where your hands are a little bit tied, I think. Before we get into more trade talk, in net, Mikko Koskinen was not great against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mike Smith was good in his relief appearance. I think it's pretty clear, like, he was in the starter's net today, Dan. You told me that before we started streaming. It's pretty clear Tippett's going with Smith. That's his boy. Is that the right call, though, to go back with Mike Smith? Zach, would you go back to Smith, or would you give Koskinen another look?
Oh, man, it's really hard to say. It really is. I would probably be willing to go back to Mike Smith. I think the goals he allowed were not as egregious as the ones Koskinen let in, right? You know what? And say what you will about Smith, but he is the battler, and he's got all the buzzwords about him, right? So I imagine he'd want to come out fired up. And you know what? Hey, he looked pretty good last night too, right? He helped shut the door and keep the Oilers as in the game as they could be throughout the rest of the second and third.
Josh, back to Smith?
Absolutely. I'm going back to Smith all day long in that situation. I think that this team just needs someone that's going to battle back there. I know that might be something you're like, oh, you're saying that Mikko Koskinen is not going to battle for this team. He's an NHL goaltender. Of course he's going to battle, but I just think that Mike Smith adds such a different element to this team when it comes to playing the puck behind his own net, taking some of that relief off of the defenseman. He's fiery. You saw it at the end of last game. And frankly, he's been better than Mikko Koskinen this year. I think that the big conversation is that when Alex Stalock comes out of his quarantine, Alex Stalock is going to be battling with Mikko Koskinen to be the 1B. I frankly believe that. What I've seen from Mikko Koskinen this year is just not good. I think he comes off the books at the end of next season. Yeah. But we can touch a little bit on this when we get into the trade deadline talk. And I've been saying this, that I just don't know what the long-term solution is for this team in net, because Mike Smith, he's on the back nine. Well, he's on the last hole of his career, arguably. So, what happens to him next season? What happens to him the season after that? When Mikko Koskinen comes off the books, what are you looking at? And I don't know. I'm just a guy that at this point, I look at that situation and I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, Mike Smith's my guy.
Brad Stabenko says, I think Tip is scared of telling Smith he's not starting. I'd be scared to tell Smith he's not starting too. Dan, is starting Smith the right call tomorrow night?
I don't think so. In my opinion, I think that this team has a trend where they like to give the guy his shot back in the net. Smith got that when he absolutely got shelled by Winnipeg, and Koskinen came in and took the loss for him at the end of that game. Why isn't Koskinen getting that same respect? The guy came out, played 12 of 13 games for this team, and yes, sure, the underlying numbers aren't great on him, but like situationally, like we talked about it there about yesterday's game. Zach made the point that you go down 2-0 in that game, sure, that's bad, but there's also been games where Mikko Koskinen has absolutely held us alive in the first period, while the rest of the team is a dead carcass out there. Koskinen's holding us up and keeping us in the game. So I don't know. I get that the goalies' numbers don't look good, but we all watch the games, and these guys are out there, and they like 90% of the time they give us a chance to win, and they're playing well in those tight spots because this team has some absolute gaffes on their defensive coverage. Their exits of the zone outside of that 5-game win streak have been absolutely a joke. The whole year we've been making giveaways that lead to breakaways. Our breakaway for 60 has to be tops in the league. So it just, for me, it's give Koskinen back the net, let him show that he can redeem himself. I think he can do it. That both of those goalies have been able to do time and time again. But at the end of the day, Tippett has had his finger on the pulse with these two goalies. He at least, in his defense, he does know what these two guys bring to the game. And I think you're right, Josh. I think that Stalock comes in and he adds a different element to this team that gives them that competition, because Smith isn't going to be otherworldly the whole time. We all know that. Just like I hope people don't think that Koskinen is just done as a goalie either. So I don't know. For me, the team has created this system where they like to give the guy his shot after getting shelled. I'd like to see them do that for Koskinen as well.
I was really surprised when I saw that the Oilers claimed Alex Stalock for a number of reasons on Monday. First off, I missed the memo that he was on waivers. So that one really threw me for a loop. I was like, Oilers claim Stalock. I was like, holy shit, he was on waivers? I thought this guy was good. And he is good. He has good numbers. He had good numbers last year. I like your point, Josh. I think there's a chance Stalock ends up stepping in here and playing a few games. And I think it was Oilers John who pointed this out. Remember what happened last time Edmonton got a goalie from Minnesota in the middle of a season. But Zach, do you think there's a chance Stalock comes in here and actually finds a way to steal some starts?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, you know what? Say what you will, he's 33 years old, but he's only played 151 games in the NHL, so he's got about as young of a body as you could ask for in the net. And last year, he was a stud for the Minnesota Wild. You know what? They went on an absolute tear with him, 20-11-4 record, and he posted at a .910 save percentage, which is a hundredth of a percentile point above his career average, right? So he's a good goaltender who's historically been a good goaltender. And I think he's a guy that's going to be highly motivated. I wrote an article today that just went up on Oilersnation.com. Everybody can go check it out right now about Stalock actually suffering from a heart condition post-COVID. And that's what his upper body injury was. And he kind of lost the net there. And it almost sounds like, he was expecting to go down to Iowa to the Minnesota AHL club and get a little chance to work himself back up. And he knew he was going to go on waivers at some point, but he almost feels a little bit wronged from the Minnesota Wild. So I think we're going to have a guy coming in here that is going to be highly motivated to come in and prove his worth in the NHL.
And here's the interesting thing. One more year at $700,000, I believe, or pretty much league minimum for this guy. Yep. If he comes in and gives you anything resembling an NHL caliber goaltender, he might be here for the next year as well. Like, he might be a guy that sticks around for a while. The Stalock pickup is very interesting.
Yeah, he could be a guy that replaces Mike Smith next year. Easily, right? So
yeah. Or, I mean, if they're in the market to go out, like, not that you want to go running around and just buying out guys left, right, and center, but if you can't get rid of Mikko Koskinen's contract and you want to buy out the last year of that, you could save yourself $3 million against the cap, and it's only 1.5 for the year after as a cap penalty. So let's say the Oilers want to go make a big splash and they want to go get a Kemper or something like that. If you have Stalock as the backup at $700K, if you buy out Koskinen, you have an extra $3 million to go get a potential starter. Again, I don't want to be throwing a bunch of dead cap space on the books because it sucks. But I think that's an interesting option. If we're playing a hypothetical out where Stalock comes in and plays better than the Oilers' two current options, but an idea that neither Smith or Koskinen could be back next year, and it could be a Kemper or a Grubauer or someone starting with Stalock right below him because he's so cheap, I think that's something that might have legs to it.
We just get Benoit Pouliot off the books, and now Tyler wants to put Mikko Koskinen on him.
Oh, I would buy out James Neal this offseason too. I'm like, I hated it this last offseason. I was so against buying out James Neal. I said, you don't do it. You don't need more dead money. But with the cap staying flat, and I think there's a chance for the Oilers to free up some space on guys who don't necessarily deserve what they're making right now, the Neal buyout's appetizing for me this offseason, but I'll admit that's a conversation for another day. The trade deadline is a lot closer. That is a hurdle Ken Holland will need to clear before this offseason. There's a few holes on this team. I think that's fair to say. You don't need to give me specific names, but I figured we'd wrap up this week's episode of State of the Nation with what should be the Oilers' number one priority come trade deadline time. Or do you think Ken Holland just needs to steal another quote from my friend Lowtide, keep his powder dry a little bit? I'll go to you first, Josh. Biggest need at the deadline?
I want to say goaltending, but if I think they're going to acquire a goalie, or I think they're going to address that obviously problem for this team, I think they're going to do it in the offseason. I would want them to do it in the offseason. So, especially because if you're looking at all the goaltending options in Canada, they aren't great. You're probably going to end up getting a guy from down south. So, obviously, with the quarantine rules and stuff, I don't think acquiring a goaltender at the deadline this year would really be foreseeable. It could be, obviously, but I don't know what it would take, and I think you could probably argue the same thing, that you're going to have to go through the quarantine rules no matter who you get as well. But I would love to see the Oilers take a run at potentially a top 9 winger. Obviously the amount that you'd have to give up to get a top 6 guy would be a lot, but I think that if you were able to fill a hole in that top 6, especially, I've been saying it, on McDavid's wing, I think that would be really good. But obviously, it would take a lot to give it up. You're probably going to get a guy that's on the last year of his contract. Are you willing to spend that kind of money and spend those kind of assets to get a rental, especially in this kind of season that we're looking at right now? I don't know. You saw what happened with Arizona last year when they acquired Taylor Hall at the deadline, but I don't know. I would love to see them take a run at a top 6, top 9 kind of guy. I think they're okay on the back end. Obviously, you don't really want to go into a playoff series with 4 of your 6 defensemen being rookies per se. But yeah, I would say in the offseason, I'd like them to address the goaltending and then potentially take a run at a top 9 guy at the deadline.
Zach, what do you think at the deadline this year?
Yeah, I don't hate the idea of going for a top 9 forward. I mean, I think you need a right shot in your bottom 6 center. I think that's a place the Oilers need to target. Obviously, the Kyle Turris experiment hasn't worked out thus far. Will he get back into some games? Absolutely. He'll get another look at some point here. But the Oilers need to find a good, consistent right shot center for the bottom 6.
Dan, what do you think the Oilers should be looking to grab at the deadline?
Yeah, I think it's just I don't know. This week I feel like I'm not saying for you guys specifically, but I think it's just kind of poisoning people's brains a little bit. Like, we are the second place team in the North Division. Excuse me, chokes me up. I don't
Makes you
think
so emotional.
I don't think that it's going to be I don't think it's that means we're going to the Stanley Cup Finals at this point right now. I think that we need some depth up front. I don't know necessarily that you pay for the marquee winger, like a Philip Forsberg or something like that. No. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to cough here again.
That's okay. Well, I would love to see Arvidsson or Raquel. I hear those names and I'm salivating with the idea of one of them in the Oilers' top 6. But you kind of, to use a vulgar term, you kind of blew your load last trade deadline, didn't you? You traded too many picks. You don't really have that many bullets in the chamber to use here.
Yeah, it's just, for me, it's I was happy at the start of the season with the created team that we have, and I'm not unhappy with it at this very moment. So I just, unless something shows up on your doorstep, and I don't think it's like John Gibson's going to show up kind of thing, but unless something like that showed up on your doorstep, I just don't see them doing much other than minor transactions here or there. Maybe pick up somebody from Ottawa that can, I saw the name of good guy that runs hockeyfights.com. Can't think of his name.
Austin Watson?
No, other guy. Better, or not Delorier, but Michael Haley. That kind of idea where it's just like a veteran presence that can come into your lineup and just mix it up for you on that fourth line. But that's, for me, it's just kind of tweaks here and there. Like you said, Tyler, I don't think we have the assets to do that move right now, and I don't think we need to. I think that this team is built to compete for that North Division final, and then you see what happens from there on in. If you're playing Vegas, it's going to be a tough series. If you get through there, then you're playing, whoever. But yeah, for me, this team is good enough to make the North Division playoffs and make some noise because you have Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid on your team.
I've kind of heard Brandon Sutter's a name to keep an eye on. And the reason the reason I think there might be some legs to the Sutter idea, and not that I love him as a player, but he is a right shot bottom six center. He's a UFA at the end of the year. The Canucks are probably going to be out of the race come trade deadline time. $4.375 million. So they'd have to keep a good chunk of it. But the Oilers play the Canucks on trade deadline day. They're in Vancouver. So if you're Ken Holland, shop around for maybe some better fits in the bottom six. But if it comes to deadline day, you give up a 2022 fourth-round pick or a fifth-round pick in next year's draft when you have a few more picks to give for Sutter, and he just has to jump across the hall. There's no quarantine. He can basically come right into your lineup. That's an interesting idea. As much as I'm not sold on Brandon Sutter being a huge upgrade in the bottom six, I think he's a penalty-killing right-shot centerman who might be able to help them out in the playoffs a little bit. Would anyone here be like totally against the idea of Brandon Sutter, or if it's sort of a last resort thing, is that okay?
Well, in that situation, Vancouver would have to retain salary, right? Like they'd
have to keep half.
They'd have to keep half of it. No, and I think, Tyler, it's funny that you mentioned that. Look at you. You're just diving into the schedule. The Oilers play the Canucks on trade deadline day. That's funny. So then it would make, obviously, I think with the way it works, even if you get traded within Canada, if you're taking a commercial flight, you're still going to have to quarantine for a few days, I believe. Correct? So I don't know exactly how it works, because I think that happened with Cassian, right? When he was coming back from his injury. I think they were saying that when he got home, because of the fact that he took a commercial flight, according to NHL regulations, he had to end up quarantining for a few days. Don't quote me on that. But obviously that would be the most convenient situation for the Oilers. I don't hate it. Obviously, Kyle Turris isn't the answer for this team in the bottom six in that position. So, if Vancouver's going to retain half the salary and it's going to cost you a fifth-round pick, I don't see why you wouldn't do it.
Zach, is that a good idea, or are you a little anti-Brandon Sutter?
No, I don't mind it at all. I've just been diving into it really quickly here, and his underlying numbers have been pretty solid this year. He's not getting caved in terms of his shot attempt rate or his expected goals rate. His isolated impacts are pretty solid, right around average. I think you could do a lot worse in your bottom six than having Brandon Sutter in there. He's just under 54% on the face-off dot this year. And like you mentioned, he's a right shot guy, and he's a big body, 6'3", 190. So he can bring some size. He's obviously got the name recognition here in Alberta as a member of the Sutter family. So, that'll surely get a couple of guys fired up, to say the least.
Brad Stepanko says, what if the OEG trades one of their 50-50 nights for the rights to someone, So like you go to Columbus and you're like, hey, you guys need just like some cash to pay for some stuff. And then like the next Oilers game, it's like tonight's 50-50 is in support of the Columbus Blue Jackets or the Arizona Coyotes. And we just all chip in a little bit of money and make a deal happen. Maybe that's how the Oilers get their goalie. The Jackets go, listen, if you guys can raise us $1.5 million in a 50-50, you can have Merzlikins. And I mean, I think Oil Country would be able to do that in the snap of their fingers.
Let's just fire
man.
up a GoFundMe, baby.
That would be the highest 50-50 in NHL history. It wouldn't be close.
Yeah. The trade hinges on how high the 50-50 gets today. All right. That's where we're going to end this one. That's a good spot to end it. Thanks to Brad Stepanko. Thanks to everyone who commented on our Twitch and our Twitter. Josh, Zach, Dan, enjoy the game tomorrow night. Talk to you guys next Tuesday.
Cheers, everyone.
Peace and love.
See you later, nation citizens. This episode